Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Nature Channel. Tonight, I invite you to journey with me to a place where the earth becomes sky, where salt crystals grow like flowers, and where silence stretches so wide you can almost wrap yourself in it like a soft blanket. Take a slow breath in, and as you breathe out, let your shoulders drop just a little. We're traveling together to the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia, the largest salt flat on our peaceful planet, a place where 10,000 square kilometers of white stretch toward every horizon, catching the light like a gentle dream. You don't need to go anywhere. Just settle where you are. Let your body sink a little deeper into comfort and walk with me across this quiet, shimmering world. The Salar de Uyuni rests high in the Andes Mountains, more than 3,500 meters above the sea. Up here, the air is thin and clean, carrying nothing but the whisper of wind and the scent of mineral earth. When you arrive at the edge of this salt desert, the first thing that touches you is the light, soft, diffused, as though the sun itself has learned to be gentle in this place. The white ground reflects the sky so perfectly that sometimes you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. Long ago, tens of thousands of years before now, this wasn't a flat desert of salt at all. It was a lake, vast and deep, cradled between mountain peaks. The lake was called Lago Minchin, and its waters were fed by rainfall and mountain streams that trickled down from snowy heights. But slowly, over centuries that passed like quiet breaths, the climate changed. The rain came less often. The sun warmed the water, encouraging it to rise as vapor into the sky. And as the water left, it left behind everything it had carried: minerals, salts, the memory of the ancient sea. Today, when you stand at the center of Salar de Uyuni, you're standing on a crust of salt that can be 10 meters thick in places. 10 meters of crystallized time, of patient transformation. Beneath your feet lie layers and layers of salt hexagons, nature's favorite shape for organizing minerals into patterns. Each crystal grew slowly, molecule by molecule, as water evaporated under the warm Bolivian sun. If you could see through the white surface, you'd witness a geometry so precise it seems almost intentional, as though the earth itself were an artist arranging tiles in an endless mosaic. The surface isn't perfectly smooth. Here and there, small ridges rise up, polygonal patterns that form naturally as the salt expands and contracts with temperature changes. During the day, the sun warms the crust. At night, the cold causes it to contract slightly. This gentle breathing of the earth creates those beautiful geometric shapes, some as small as your hand, others wider than a room. Walking among them feels like wandering through a gallery where every sculpture was made by time and temperature, patience and light. When the rainy season arrives, usually between December and April, something magical happens. A thin layer of water spreads across the salt flat, just a few centimeters deep, and suddenly the Salar transforms into the largest mirror on Earth. The sky above and the sky below become one continuous canvas. Clouds float both over your head and under your feet. If you stand still in this reflected world, you might feel as though you're suspended in the atmosphere itself, weightless and calm, breathing in rhythm with the wind. This mirror effect happens because the salt flat is so incredibly level, one of the flattest natural surfaces anywhere on the planet. Across vast distances, the elevation varies by less than a meter. When water settles on something so flat, it creates a perfect reflecting pool, undisturbed by hills or valleys. Scientists use this remarkable flatness to calibrate satellites orbiting high above. They point their instruments down at the Salar using it as a reference point, a way to check that their measurements of Earth are accurate. Even from space, this place serves as a quiet guide. The salt itself holds traces of many minerals. Beneath the white crust lie vast reserves of lithium. More than half of the world's supply rests here, dissolved in brine pools under the surface. But lithium extraction happens slowly and carefully in only small areas, and most of the Salar remains untouched, a pristine white wilderness. The lithium came from the same ancient volcanic activity that shaped these mountains millions of years ago, leached slowly from rocks, carried by water, concentrated over unimaginable spans of time. During the dry season, when no rain has fallen for months, the salt hardens into a solid plain. You can drive across it, and some travelers do, their vehicles leaving temporary tracks that the wind soon softens and erases. But even better than driving is walking, slowly, with no destination, just moving through the white quiet. The crunch of salt crystals under your feet sounds like soft footsteps on fresh snow. Each step releases a faint mineral scent, clean and ancient, the smell of earth that has been purified by sun and time. At the edges of the Salar, small islands rise from the white expanse. These islands are the peaks of old volcanoes that once stood at the shores of the ancient lake. Now, they emerge from the salt like quiet sentinels covered in hardy plants and giant cacti. The largest island is called Incahuasi, which means underscore, quote, underscore, zero, underscore in the Quechua language. On Incahuasi, 1,000-year-old cacti grow, some reaching 10 meters tall. They grow slowly, perhaps 1 centimeter per year, adding ring after ring in their quiet, patient way, watching over the white desert below. These cacti are a species called Trichocereus, and they've adapted to this harsh, beautiful environment. Their roots dig deep into the volcanic rock, searching for moisture. Their thick skin protects them from intense sun and freezing nights. During rare rains, they drink deeply, storing water in their flesh for the long, dry months ahead. When they bloom, usually in November, they produce white flowers that open at night, releasing a subtle fragrance that drifts on the evening air. The islands also host small populations of vizcachas, rabbit-like creatures with long tails related to chinchillas. These gentle animals hop among the rocks, nibbling on hardy grasses and lichens. They're most active in early morning and late evening, avoiding the intense midday sun. If you sit quietly on Incahuasi at dawn, you might see them emerging from their burrows, stretching in the cool air, beginning their slow, peaceful day. Birds visit the Salar too, especially during the wet season when it becomes a mirror. 3 species of flamingos, James's flamingo, Andean flamingo, and Chilean flamingo, wade through the shallow water, filtering tiny organisms and algae through their specialized beaks. Their pink feathers reflect in the water below, creating double images, flamingo above and flamingo below, moving in perfect synchrony. They breed here, building cone-shaped mud nests on small islands in the water, raising their young in this remote, protected place. The flamingos get their pink color from the carotenoid pigments in the algae and small crustaceans they eat. In these high-altitude salt lakes, certain types of algae thrive in water too salty for most other life. The flamingos have evolved to exploit this niche. their bodies specially adapted to process salt and extract nutrition from what seems like a barren environment. Watching them feed is like watching a meditation, slow, rhythmic movements, their heads dipping down and rising up over and over in patient repetition. The sky above Salar de Uyuni is a spectacle all its own. At this altitude, with no cities nearby to create light pollution, the stars appear in multitudes you might never have imagined. On clear nights, the Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light. If you visit during the mirror season and lie on your back looking up, you see stars above and their reflections below, and you're floating between two galaxies, suspended in wonder. The air is so clear here that you can see stars down to the horizon in every direction. Constellations appear brighter, more defined. The Southern Cross hangs in the sky, along with constellations that have guided travelers for thousands of years. Indigenous people in this region have their own star stories, different from Western astronomy, but equally beautiful, stories of animals and ancestors, of planting seasons and sacred times, all written in the patient light of distant suns. During the day, the light changes constantly. In early morning, the white salt takes on soft blue tones, reflecting the emerging sky. As the sun rises higher, the brightness intensifies until the entire landscape seems to glow from within. Sunglasses help, but even with them, you're wrapped in luminosity. Around midday, when the sun is directly overhead, shadows nearly disappear. Everything becomes light. No darkness, no hiding, just pure white openness. In late afternoon, the light begins to warm. The salt turns gold, then pink, then shades of orange and lavender as the sun approaches the mountains. This is when photographers love to visit, when the colors deepen and the flatness of the land makes the horizon into a perfect line where earth meets sky. The sunset here doesn't happen in one place. It happens everywhere at once, painting the entire world in soft fire. The temperature changes dramatically between day and night. Daytime can be comfortably warm, even hot when the sun is high. But after sunset, the temperature drops quickly. At this altitude, the thin atmosphere doesn't hold heat well, so warmth escapes rapidly into space. Night temperatures can fall below freezing, even in summer. This daily rhythm of warmth and cold, expansion and contraction, is part of what shapes the salt patterns, part of the slow sculpture that time performs here. Wind moves across the salar in long, uninterrupted sweeps. With no trees or buildings to slow it, the wind here has a clarity, a purity of purpose. It carries the scent of distant mountains, the whisper of upcoming weather. Sometimes it's strong enough to create small whirlwinds, dust devils made of salt particles that spin briefly and then collapse, leaving only stillness behind. When strong winds blow during the wet season, they create tiny ripples on the water's surface, and the mirror becomes textured like brushed silk. The reflections become softer, more impressionistic. The sharp division between earth and sky blurs into something dreamlike. You can walk into this landscape and feel as though you've stepped into a painting where all the usual rules have been suspended, where gravity and dimension have become suggestions rather than certainties. The salt crystals that form the surface of the salar are primarily halite, common salt, sodium chloride, the same mineral that seasons your food. But this salt formed through a process far more patient than any cooking. Each crystal grew as water molecules evaporated, leaving dissolved minerals behind. The molecules arrange themselves in cubic structures, building themselves atom by atom into the geometric shapes that feel so satisfying under your fingers. If you kneel down and look closely at the salt surface during dry season, you'll see that it's not uniformly white. There are subtle variations: cream, pale gray, ivory, sometimes even faint pink, where different minerals concentrate. Gypsum crystals scatter across certain areas, their transparent forms catching light and breaking it into tiny rainbows. These small prisms lie scattered like forgotten jewelry across the white expanse. In some places, the salt has formed rose-like structures, delicate formations that look almost like flowers made of mineral. These salt roses grow slowly, their petals actually thin layers of crystal that have formed at slightly different times, creating a layered, organic appearance. They're fragile. If you pick one up, it might crumble in your hand. But where they remain undisturbed, they can last for years, small sculptures created by evaporation and time. The brine pools beneath the salt crust create another layer of this landscape's beauty. In certain areas, drilling has revealed the liquid reservoir below, water so saturated with minerals that it's denser than the Dead Sea. This brine contains not just sodium chloride, but also potassium, magnesium, and that valuable lithium, all dissolved in concentrations that make the water feel silky, almost oily against your skin. Small-scale salt harvesting happens at the edges of the salar, where local communities have collected salt for generations. During the dry season, workers cut blocks of salt from the crust using simple tools. These blocks are transported to processing areas where they're refined into table salt and iodized for use in homes across Bolivia and beyond. The work is hard but rhythmic, following patterns established long ago, honoring the relationship between people and this generous mineral plain. Near the town of Colchane, at the edge of the salar, you'll find small hotels built entirely of salt blocks. The walls are salt, the floors are salt, even some of the furniture is carved from salt. Inside these buildings, the air has a particular quality, slightly mineral, very dry, completely clean. Sleeping in a salt hotel feels like resting inside a geode, surrounded by the Earth's patient crystallization, wrapped in the deep quiet that only stone and mineral can provide. The journey to Salar de Uyuni often begins in the town of Uyuni itself, a small settlement that serves as the gateway to this white wilderness. Uyuni sits at the intersection of old railway lines, tracks that were built more than a century ago to transport minerals from the mountains. Some of these old trains still rest outside the town, rusting slowly in the dry air, their metal bodies gradually returning to oxide, becoming part of the mineral landscape again. These train graveyards have their own beauty. Iron and steel weathering under the intense sun, paint fading to soft pastels, wheels and gears seized in permanent stillness. Visitors often photograph them against the backdrop of distant mountains, finding poetry in abandonment, beauty in decay. The trains remind us that everything is temporary. Everything changes. Everything eventually returns to Earth in one form or another. The people who live near the salar have stories that stretch back centuries. The Aymara and Quechua peoples have inhabited these high plateaus since long before Spanish colonization. They understand this landscape in ways that go beyond scientific measurement. They know its moods, its seasons, its gifts, and challenges. Their traditional knowledge includes which plants can survive here, when rains will come, how to read the sky for weather changes. In their languages, they have words for specific types of wind, particular qualities of light, the exact shade of white the salt becomes before rain. This vocabulary of place is a kind of poetry, a way of being intimate with environment. When they speak about the Salar, they often speak of it as a living thing, not exactly conscious, but not entirely inert either, something that participates in the world, that responds to season and storm, that gives and receives. The rainy season brings subtle changes to the vegetation around the Salar's edges. Hardy grasses called ichu begin to green slightly, preparing for their brief growing season. These tufted grasses can survive on minimal water, their roots spreading wide to capture every bit of moisture. They provide food for vicuñas and llamas, the graceful camelids that inhabit these high plateaus, moving slowly across the landscape in small family groups. Vicuñas are the wild relatives of llamas, smaller and more delicate, with incredibly soft wool that's among the finest natural fibers in the world. They graze in the early morning and late afternoon, avoiding the intense midday sun. Their movements are cautious, elegant. They lift their heads frequently, listening, watching, always aware. If you're lucky enough to see them near the Salar, watch how they move together, how they communicate through small sounds and postures, how they navigate this challenging environment with such apparent ease. The geology beneath the Salar tells stories millions of years old. This region is part of the Altiplano, the high plateau of the Andes. It formed as the Nazca tectonic plate pushed beneath the South American plate, causing the land to crumple upward like fabric being pushed together. Volcanoes erupted along this collision zone, depositing layers of ash and lava. Over time, these deposits weathered, releasing minerals that washed into the basin that would become the Salar. Some of those ancient volcanoes still steam gently on the horizon. The Tunupa volcano rises at the northern edge of the Salar, its slopes dark against the white plain. Local legend says that Tunupa was once a beautiful goddess who married a mountain god. When he abandoned her, she wept so much that her tears, mixed with her breast milk, formed the white salt flat. Whether you believe the legend or the geology, both stories speak of transformation, of water leaving something beautiful behind. The mineral composition of the Salar varies slightly in different areas. In some zones, ulexite, a boron mineral sometimes called TV rock because of its fiber optic properties, forms beneath the surface. When polished, ulexite can project an image from one side through to the other, a natural fiber optic crystal. Miners occasionally find these formations, small windows of transparency in the white opacity. During certain weather conditions, mirages appear on the horizon. The flat landscape and clear air create perfect conditions for light to bend, creating images of water or mountains that aren't there, or that are much farther away than they appear. These optical illusions add to the dreamlike quality of the place. You might see a lake shimmering in the distance, only to walk toward it and have it recede, always just beyond reach, a promise that never quite materializes. The silence at the Salar is profound, especially when you walk far from roads and visitors. In this silence, you can hear your own heartbeat, your own breathing. Small sounds become loud, the scrape of your shoe on salt, the rustle of your jacket in the breeze. This silence isn't empty. It's full of subtle presence of space, of opportunity to hear yourself think and feel without the constant noise of civilization. At night, that silence deepens. If you camp on the Salar, which some tour operators allow in designated areas, you can lie in your tent and hear almost nothing. Maybe wind moving across the tent fabric, maybe your own thoughts settling like dust. The quiet is so complete that it becomes almost tangible, something you could touch if you reached out. Many visitors report that they sleep more deeply here than they have in years, cradled by elevation and silence and the solid earth below. The morning light arrives slowly at Salar de Uyuni, painting the eastern sky in gradual layers of color, deep blue fading to turquoise, then pale yellow, then the first hints of pink and orange. If you're awake for sunrise, you can watch the transformation happen degree by degree, the darkness retreating across the white plain like a soft blanket being gently pulled away. The salt begins to glow even before the sun appears, reflecting the brightening sky, until the entire landscape seems lit from within. When the sun finally rises above the mountain ridges, its first rays strike the salt horizontally, creating long shadows from even the smallest irregularities. A grain of salt can cast a shadow meters long. These shadows slowly shrink as the sun climbs, a natural clock marking the passage of morning. Birds that roost on the salt islands begin their day, their calls carrying across the still air with remarkable clarity. The temperature rises quickly once the sun is up. Within an hour, the chill of night burns away, and the air begins to warm against your face. The salt surface warms too, though more slowly than you might expect. The white color reflects much of the sun's energy back into the sky, keeping the surface cooler than dark earth would be. Still, by mid-morning, you can feel the heat beginning to radiate upward, creating subtle thermal currents that make the distant horizon shimmer and dance. These thermal currents sometimes create small whirlwinds during the hottest part of the day. You'll see them forming in the distance, columns of salt dust rising and spinning, moving across the flat landscape like transparent ghosts. They rarely last more than a minute or two before dissipating, but while they exist, they're mesmerizing to watch. Nature's spontaneous sculpture, air made briefly visible through the dust it carries. The Salar's vastness affects your sense of distance and scale in peculiar ways. Objects far away seem closer than they are because there's nothing in between to provide reference. A vehicle that looks like it's a short walk away might actually be several kilometers distant. People sometimes play with this distortion, creating photographs where perspective makes them appear to stand in someone's hand, or where a person seems giant next to a tiny car. The flatness eliminates the usual visual cues we use to judge size and distance. This distortion of perception extends to sound as well. On very still days, voices can carry for remarkable distances across the salt. You might hear someone talking hundreds of meters away as clearly as if they were standing beside you. Other times, the wind creates a constant white noise that absorbs sound, making even nearby conversations seem muffled and distant. The acoustic properties of the place change with weather and wind, creating an ever-shifting soundscape. Water birds that visit during the wet season leave tracks in the soft mud at the edges of the salar. These tracks can remain visible for weeks after the birds have moved on, preserved in the salt-saturated mud that dries slowly under the sun. You can read these tracks like stories: the three-toed prints of flamingos, the webbed feet of ducks, the small hopping patterns of shorebirds. Each set of tracks is a diary of movement, a record of where a creature walked and when, preserved in mineral and time. The edges where the salar meets dry land host communities of salt-tolerant plants called halophytes. These remarkable plants have evolved mechanisms to cope with high salt concentrations that would kill most vegetation. Some store salt in special cells that they then shed like leaves. Others simply tolerate high internal salt concentrations. Their cellular chemistry adapted to function in conditions most plants can't survive. They bloom in tiny flowers, purple, yellow, white, small celebrations of life in a challenging environment. One of these plants is a species of quinoa that grows wild around the salar's margins. Quinoa is a grain native to the Andes, and it evolved in these harsh conditions: high altitude, extreme temperature fluctuations, poor soil, limited water. The same qualities that made it challenging to grow here also made it incredibly nutritious and resilient. Today, quinoa is recognized worldwide as a superfood, but it began here, adapting to the difficult beauty of these high plateaus. The soil around the salar contains volcanic ash mixed with salt and mineral deposits. This combination creates a substrate that's both fertile and challenging. The volcanic ash contributes nutrients, but the high salt content makes water uptake difficult for plants. Those that do grow here have developed deep root systems, sometimes extending several meters down, to find fresher water below the salty surface layers. In some areas, you'll find small streams fed by snowmelt from distant mountains. These streams flow into the salar during spring, carrying fresh water that gradually mixes with the salt. Where they enter the salar, they create zones of lower salinity where slightly different plants can grow, where the water is less harsh. These zones become oases for insects and small animals, concentration points of life in the wide expanse. The insects that live here are mostly small, hardy species, beetles adapted to extreme conditions, flies that breed in the marginal waters, occasional butterflies that visit flowering plants. During the brief wet season, brine shrimp appear in the shallow lakes, tiny creatures, barely visible, but present in enormous numbers. These shrimp are what feed the flamingos, converting algae and bacteria into animal protein, forming a vital link in this simplified but functional ecosystem. Microorganisms thrive in the salar in remarkable diversity. Bacteria and archaea that can tolerate extreme salinity, high UV radiation, and wide temperature swings have colonized the brine pools and even the salt crystals themselves. Some of these microbes are similar to organisms found in other extreme environments on Earth: deep sea vents, Antarctic ice, desert rocks. Studying them helps scientists understand the limits of life and possibly provides clues about where life might exist on other worlds. The possibility of life on other planets is one reason space agencies study the salar. Its combination of salt, water, and UV radiation is similar to conditions that might exist on Mars or some of the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn. If microbes can survive and even flourish in the salar's brines, then perhaps similar life could exist in the subsurface oceans of Europa or Enceladus. The white flat serves as a testing ground for instruments that might one day search for life beyond Earth. Looking up from the salar during the day, you see clouds forming and dissolving in patterns that seem almost intentional. The thin air and high altitude mean clouds form at lower pressures than at sea level, often creating unusual shapes, lenticular clouds that hover like UFOs, cirrus strands that stretch across the entire sky, towering cumulus that build during afternoon hours. If rain is coming, you can watch the clouds organizing themselves, darkening, preparing to release their moisture. When rain does fall, it often evaporates before reaching the ground, a phenomenon called virga. You can see the dark streaks beneath clouds, rain falling from the sky, but disappearing into the dry air before completing its journey to Earth. It creates a visual paradox: rain that never lands, moisture that returns to the atmosphere before it can wet the ground, a cycle interrupted mid-completion. But sometimes the rain does reach the salar, and when it does, the transformation is swift and stunning. The white surface darkens as it becomes wet. Pools begin to form in the slight depressions. Within hours, the entire flat can be covered in a shallow sheet of water, and that's when the mirror appears, when the sky suddenly has a twin below, when walking across the salar becomes like moving through clouds. The mirror effect is most perfect when the water is completely still. No wind, no ripples, just glass-smooth surface tension holding the water in place. In these moments, the only way to know where the ground actually is might be to see your own reflection looking back up at you from below, or to notice that the clouds below are slightly sharper than the clouds above, a difference in the quality of light that tells you which sky is reflected and which is real. Photographers travel from around the world to capture this phenomenon. The images that result often seem impossible. People appearing to stand on clouds, cars driving through the sky, the sun setting both above and below the horizon simultaneously. These aren't manipulated images. They're accurate recordings of what this place actually looks like when conditions are right, when the earth becomes mirror, when the boundaries between elements dissolve. The local communities have learned to predict when the mirror will form. They watch the sky, feel the humidity, read subtle signs in how the wind moves and how the mountains appear on the horizon. Their predictions aren't based on satellite data or computer models, but on generations of observation, on knowing this place as intimately as you might know the face of someone you love, able to detect the smallest changes, the first hints of transformation. After the rain, as the water slowly evaporates again, the salt takes on yet another appearance. The surface becomes a patchwork of wet and dry zones, dark and light patterns that shift day by day as the moisture retreats. In the wet areas, the salt crystals are temporarily dissolved. As the water evaporates, they recrystallize, sometimes in new formations, sometimes on top of the old structures, adding another microscopic layer to the accumulation of time. If you visit during this transition period, you can find areas where the salt has formed perfect cube-shaped crystals, some large enough to pick up and hold in your palm. These cubes are halite in its most basic geometric expression, the molecular structure made visible at a scale you can see and touch. Each cube is clear or white, sometimes slightly pink, with faces so flat they seem machine polished, though they formed entirely through natural processes. The pinkish tint in some salt crystals comes from microscopic algae called Dunaliella salina. These single-celled organisms produce red carotenoid pigments to protect themselves from the intense UV radiation at this altitude. When they're present in high concentrations in the brine, they can tint the water pink or orange. As the water evaporates and crystals form, some of these pigments become trapped in the salt structure, creating natural colored crystals. At certain times of year, usually late afternoon, the salar can produce a phenomenon called the green flash. This is an optical effect that sometimes occurs at sunset when atmospheric conditions are just right. As the sun dips below the horizon, its light passes through layers of atmosphere that act like a prism, separating colors. For just a second or two, a brilliant green light appears at the very top of the sun. It's rare and brief, but the salar's clarity of atmosphere and perfectly flat horizon make it more likely to occur here than in many other places. The horizon at Salar de Uyuni is so geometrically perfect that it's used as a reference in discussions about the curvature of the Earth. On a clear day, if you look in any direction, you can see the horizon as a clean line where the white salt meets the blue sky. Because the surface is so flat and so large, you can actually perceive the gentle curve of the Earth, the way the horizon drops away slightly in the far distance, a reminder that we live on a sphere, not a plane. This curvature is subtle. The salar is only about 130 kilometers across at its widest point, not quite enough to make the curve obvious to casual observation. But careful measurement and photography, especially from elevated points like the Salt Islands, can capture the gentle arc. It's a humbling perspective, a reminder of scale, of the planet's size, of our position on a round world floating in space. The moon rises over Salar de Uyuni with the same dramatic clarity as the sun. On nights near the full moon, the salt flat becomes luminous, glowing with reflected moonlight until you can see for kilometers in every direction. The landscape takes on a blue-gray tone, softer than daylight, but still bright enough to walk without a flashlight. Shadows are gentler in moonlight, and the temperature has already dropped, making the air crisp and still. During the wet season, a full moon creates double illumination, the moon above and its reflection below, both bright enough to read by. Some visitors plan their trips specifically for these nights, when the Salar transforms into a realm of silver and blue, when time seems to pause, when the ordinary world feels very far away. Walking across the mirror under moonlight is like moving through a dream, each step creating ripples that disturb both the water and its reflected moon. The salt islands become mysterious silhouettes in the moonlight, dark shapes rising from the glowing plain. If you camp on one of these islands and look out across the salar at night, you see nothing but white-blue luminescence extending to every horizon, with stars above and their reflections below, and you floating between them, a small, warm consciousness in the midst of immense peace. Stars that rise on the eastern horizon appear to emerge from the salt itself during mirror season, climbing up from their own reflections until you can see them both rising and already risen, duplicate stars and duplicate skies. The constellations arrange themselves above and below, perfect twins, until the entire sphere of heaven is wrapped around you. Ancient astronomers would have marveled at this place, this natural planetarium where the cosmos displays itself in double. Meteor showers are particularly spectacular when viewed from the Salar. The annual Perseids in August, the Geminids in December, During these events, shooting stars streak across both skies, leaving trails of light above and below. Sometimes a particularly bright meteor will leave a persistent train, a glowing streak that lingers for seconds after the meteor itself has burned up. In the mirror, this creates a perfect duplicate, a second ghost trail hanging in the reflected sky. The Salar's high altitude means less atmosphere between you and space, making the stars appear even brighter and more numerous than they would at sea level. Astronomers measure something called limiting magnitude, the faintest star you can see with the naked eye. At sea level in a dark location, you might see stars down to magnitude 6 or 6.5. At Salar de Uyuni, on a clear moonless night, that limit extends to magnitude 7 or even 7.5, revealing hundreds of additional stars, making the Milky Way so dense with light it seems almost solid. The Milky Way stretches directly overhead for part of the night, depending on season. The dark dust lanes that divide it become clearly visible. The Great Rift, a dark river running through the River of Light. Indigenous peoples in this region have their own name for these dark nebulae, seeing different shapes and stories in the shadows between the stars. Some see a llama, others see different animals, each culture finding its own meaning in the patterns of light and dark. Satellites pass overhead frequently, bright points of light moving steadily across the constellations. The International Space Station, when its orbit brings it over Bolivia, is bright enough to cast faint shadows. Watching it pass, you're seeing sunlight reflected off solar panels hundreds of kilometers above. People living in space, looking down at Earth, perhaps even seeing the white patch of the Salar below them, wondering what it would be like to stand there. On rare occasions, the aurora australis, the southern lights, can be seen from this latitude, though it's much less common than from closer to the poles. When solar activity is particularly strong, the aurora can extend far enough north to be visible from the altiplano. It appears as a faint greenish glow on the southern horizon, subtle but unmistakable. A reminder that Earth is connected to the sun by more than just light and warmth, but also by the solar wind, by streams of particles flowing through space. The quietest hours at the Salar are just before dawn, when night is ending, but day hasn't begun. The stars begin to fade in the east. The air is at its coldest. If there's water on the salt, it's perfectly still. Nothing has disturbed it during the night. The first birds haven't yet started calling. This is the hour of deepest silence, deepest peace, when the Salar feels like the edge of the world, the boundary between something and nothing, presence and absence, being and becoming. As dawn approaches, the eastern sky begins its transformation again, the cycle completing, beginning anew. The darkness lifts gradually, and if you're watching carefully, you can see the exact moment when the first color appears, when black becomes deep blue, when the day signals its intention to return. The stars don't disappear all at once, but fade one by one, the brightest ones lingering until full daylight, reluctant to leave the stage. The planet Venus, when it's visible, is the last star to fade in the morning sky. It shines so bright that it can cast a faint shadow before sunrise. At the Salar, with the mirror effect, Venus appears twice, once above and once reflected, the morning star and its twin, heralding the sun's return with doubled brilliance. The first light of a new day touches the peaks of distant volcanoes before it reaches the salt flat itself. You can watch the line of sunrise descending the mountain slopes, moving downward as the sun climbs higher until finally it spills out across the white expanse, and another day begins at Salar de Uyuni. This daily rhythm, darkness to light, cold to warmth, stars to sun, repeats with a regularity that feels both predictable and somehow miraculous. Each sunrise is unique in its details, but identical in its essential nature. The same transformation that's been happening here for thousands of years, long before anyone came to watch, and will continue long after we're gone. There's comfort in that continuity, in these reliable cycles, in knowing that some things remain constant, even as everything changes. The breakfast hour at the Salar is gentle. If you're camping or staying in a salt hotel, you might step outside to find the air warming quickly, the sky clear and blue, and the salt stretching away in every direction. The salt hotels often serve quinoa porridge for breakfast. Quinoa that might have been grown just kilometers away, harvested from fields at the edge of the White Plain, grain that's been nourishing people in this region for thousands of years. Coffee at this altitude tastes slightly different than at sea level because water boils at a lower temperature. At 3,600 meters, water boils at about 87 degrees Celsius instead of the usual 100. This means beverages made with boiling water, coffee, tea, soups, are slightly cooler and extract flavors differently. But somehow coffee sipped while looking out across the Salar tastes exactly right. The temperature and flavor perfectly matched to the moment and place. Local guides who work on the Salar have stories accumulated over years of bringing visitors to this place. They've seen marriage proposals on the mirror, sunrise ceremonies, meditation groups sitting in circles for hours, children running across the white expanse with pure joy. They've witnessed the Salar in every season and weather condition, and they speak about it with a mixture of professional knowledge and genuine wonder, as if even after hundreds of visits, the place still surprises them. These guides know exactly where to position you for the best mirror photographs, where the water tends to be calmest, which times of day offer which qualities of light. Their knowledge is practical and aesthetic. They understand both the mechanics of the place and its beauty. They can point out the distant volcanoes and tell you their names. Tunupa, Oleg, Uturuncu. They know which islands have the oldest cacti, where flamingos are most likely to appear, and how to read the clouds to predict weather changes. The relationship between the guides and the Salar is one of familiarity and respect. They don't treat it as just a workplace, but as a place with its own character, its own moods. If a dust devil forms, they might pause what they're saying to watch it. If flamingos appear, they'll quietly point them out, not wanting to disturb the birds with loud voices. This respectful attention is something they often transmit to visitors, a way of being in this place that honors its vastness and beauty. Mid-morning at the Salar is when most tours arrive, when vehicles begin crossing the white expanse, when the solitude of dawn gives way to human activity. But the Salar is so large that even with dozens of vehicles and hundreds of people, there's still vast emptiness, still space to find your own quiet corner. The scale is such that human presence, while visible, doesn't overwhelm. We remain small against this landscape, our vehicles like toys, our voices absorbed by distance. The vehicles that traverse the Salar are typically sturdy four-wheel drives built to handle the rough roads leading to and from the salt flat. On the Salar itself, they can drive freely almost anywhere, the firm salt crust easily supporting their weight. Drivers sometimes arrange multiple vehicles in geometric patterns for photographs, creating spirals or lines that show up beautifully against the white background. Human organization meeting natural geometry. Watching a vehicle approach from far away, you see it as a tiny dot on the horizon, growing larger slowly, its dust trail streaming behind it, visible for kilometers. The sense of space becomes tangible through these long approaches, these gradual arrivals. Time seems to expand when distances are so visible, so measurable in gradual change. A journey that might take 20 minutes feels longer because you can see the entire journey happening, can watch every meter of progress. The sound of engines crossing the Salar is muted by the open air, arriving at your ears, flattened and distant, even when the vehicle is relatively close. It's a reminder that sound needs something to bounce off, something to carry it. And here, there's only air and salt and space. Without walls or trees or buildings to reflect sound waves, everything becomes quieter, absorbed into the horizontal immensity. Some areas of the Salar have been set aside as protected zones where vehicles aren't allowed, where the salt remains completely undisturbed. These zones exist to preserve the pristine quality of the landscape, to ensure that some portions remain as they've been for centuries. The salt in these protected areas shows no tire tracks, no footprints, just the natural patterns of crystal growth and wind erosion, geometry created by temperature and time. Walking in one of these undisturbed zones feels like walking on fresh snow. That same sense of being the first person to touch something pristine, of leaving a temporary mark on a surface that will heal itself given time. Your footprints in the salt are gentle, usually just a slight compression of the surface rather than deep imprints. The salt here has a slight give to it, a subtle spring, as if the crystals beneath your feet are rearranging themselves to accommodate your weight. The texture underfoot changes depending on the season and recent weather. After rain and evaporation, the surface can be firm and sharp-edged. During dry periods, it sometimes becomes slightly crusty, breaking with a satisfying crack as you step. In some areas, there's a thin layer of salt dust on top of the harder crust, and this dust puffs up around your feet with each step, creating small clouds that drift away on the breeze. The breeze itself is a constant presence at the Salar, rarely completely still. Even on days that feel calm, there's usually some movement of air, a gentle flow that you feel against your face or hear as a soft whisper. This wind carries the scent of the Andes, stone and altitude, mineral earth, the faint perfume of distant snow. In a place with so few smells, these subtle scents become noticeable, appreciated, part of the sensory experience of being here. Temperature at midday can climb to comfortable warmth or occasionally actual heat, depending on the season. Summer months, December through February, can see temperatures reaching 20 or even 25 degrees Celsius. Winter months, June through August, are cooler, with daytime temperatures often staying below 15 degrees. But the consistency is that nights are always cold, the thin atmosphere releasing heat rapidly once the sun sets, creating a temperature swing of 20 degrees or more between day and night. This extreme daily temperature variation is part of what creates the polygonal patterns in the salt. As the surface heats and cools, expands and contracts, stress lines form. Along these lines, the salt crust cracks slightly, creating boundaries. Over time, these cracks organize themselves into roughly hexagonal shapes, nature's efficient way of releasing stress evenly across a surface. The pattern repeats from the smallest scales, hexagons centimeters across, up to the largest, where polygons can measure meters or even tens of meters from side to side. If you kneel down and trace your finger along the edge of one of these polygons, you can feel the slight ridge where the salt has buckled upward. The center of each polygon is slightly lower than the edges, creating a shallow bowl shape. In the wet season, water collects in these bowls, and each polygon becomes a tiny individual mirror, thousands upon thousands of them, each reflecting the sky in its own small way. The afternoon at Salar de Uyuni brings its own particular quality of light. The sun begins its descent toward the west, and the shadows that disappeared at midday start to return, growing gradually longer. The white salt takes on a warmer tone, less pure white and more cream or ivory, reflecting the yellowing sunlight. The sky deepens from pale blue to a richer azure, and clouds, if they've formed, become more three-dimensional in appearance as the angle of light gives them depth. This is when the salar's color palette expands. In the morning, there's mostly white and blue, but afternoon brings gold and amber, hints of orange, touches of pink. The mountains on the horizon, which appeared as simple silhouettes in the morning, now show details. The striations of rock layers, the variation in color from one peak to another, the way some slopes catch light while others remain in shadow. The volcanoes that rim the Salar are young in geological terms, most of them having erupted within the last few million years. Some are still technically active, though they erupt infrequently. Tunupa, the volcano that gives its name to the salt flat in local legend, last erupted thousands of years ago, but hot springs near its base indicate that magma still flows somewhere far below, that the earth here is still alive with internal fire, even as the surface appears frozen in white stillness. These volcanoes are part of the central volcanic zone of the Andes, a chain of peaks running along the western edge of South America. They formed as the Nazca Oceanic Plate, subducted beneath the South American continental plate, the descending plate melting at depth, and that molten rock rising to create volcanoes. It's a process that continues today, millimeter by millimeter, the plate still moving, new magma still being generated deep underground. The minerals in the salar, the lithium, the potassium, the boron, all came ultimately from this volcanic activity. As magma rose and erupted, it brought with it elements from deep within the earth. As volcanic rocks weathered over millions of years, these elements were released, dissolved in groundwater, carried to the ancient lake basin, and concentrated through evaporation. The white plain is, in a sense, the distilled essence of volcanoes, their minerals extracted and purified through water and time. Hot springs still exist around the edges of the salar, places where heated groundwater rises to the surface. Some of these springs are warm enough to bathe in, creating natural hot pools surrounded by cold air, steam rising into the thin atmosphere. Soaking in one of these springs while looking out across the salt flat is an experience of contrasts. Hot water and cold air, the mineral smell of the spring, and the clean scent of salt relaxation, and alertness combined in a single moment. The water in these springs contains dissolved minerals different from those in the Salar's brine. Sulfur, silica, trace elements that give the water a slippery feeling and a distinctive smell. These minerals are thought to have therapeutic properties, and people have been bathing in Andean hot springs for thousands of years, seeking relief from altitude sickness, sore muscles, and various ailments. Whether the relief is chemical or psychological, the warmth and relaxation are undeniably real. Steam from the hot spring sometimes creates small, localized weather systems. The warm, moist air rises, cools, and can form miniature clouds that hover just above the springs before dissipating. On very cold mornings, this steam can freeze into ice crystals that catch the sun, creating tiny floating rainbows. These microphenomena, visible only to those who stop and look closely, add layers of detail to a landscape that from a distance appears simple. Birds sometimes visit the hot springs, especially in winter, when the Salar itself can freeze over at night. The springs remain liquid, providing places for birds to drink and bathe even when other water is frozen solid. You might see Andean gulls, ducks, or even flamingos near these warm waters, grateful for the volcanic heat that keeps this water accessible through the coldest nights. The geology of heat and water creates a subtle ecosystem around each spring. Thermophilic bacteria, organisms that thrive in hot water, form colorful mats in and around the springs. These mats can be yellow, orange, green, or even purple, depending on which species of bacteria dominate. Each color represents a different temperature zone, a different chemical environment, a different community of microscopic life adapted to very specific conditions. These bacterial communities are ancient forms of life, similar to organisms that existed billions of years ago, when Earth was much warmer and the atmosphere was very different. Studying them helps scientists understand how life began on our planet and how it might exist in extreme environments elsewhere in the universe. The connection between the Salar and astrobiology is strong. This place serves as a window into both deep time on Earth and possible life on other worlds. Afternoon is also when you might see geology students and researchers at the Salar, taking measurements, collecting samples, studying the ongoing processes that shape this place. They measure the thickness of the salt crust, the chemistry of the brine, the rate of evaporation, the patterns of crystal growth. Their work is patient and methodical, adding to humanity's understanding of this unique environment, one data point at a time. The rate of evaporation at the Salar is surprisingly high for a place that feels so cool. The combination of intense sunlight, low humidity, and constant wind creates conditions where water disappears rapidly. During the wet season, a pool of water several centimeters deep can evaporate completely in just a few days of sunny weather. This rapid evaporation is what created the Salar in the first place. Water arriving, water leaving, minerals staying behind, the same cycle repeated for tens of thousands of years. Scientists have calculated that if all the water in the Salar's underlying brine reservoir were extracted and evaporated, it would take thousands of years for rainfall to replenish it. This calculation underscores the delicate balance here. The Salar exists at an equilibrium between water arriving from occasional rains and distant snowmelt, and water leaving through evaporation. Disturbing this balance too much could change the fundamental nature of the place. That's why lithium extraction, when it occurs, is carefully regulated. The brine is pumped into large evaporation pools where the sun does the work of concentrating the minerals. After many months, when the lithium concentration is high enough, it's processed and refined. But the water is eventually returned to the system, and extraction rates are controlled to prevent depleting the underground reservoir faster than it's replenished. The question of how to balance resource extraction with preservation is complex here, as it is in many places. The lithium in the salar could power millions of electric vehicle batteries, contributing to a global transition away from fossil fuels. But the extraction process, if not carefully managed, could damage this extraordinary landscape. The challenge is finding a way to benefit from the resources while protecting the beauty and scientific value of the place itself. Local communities have strong voices in these discussions. For them, the salar isn't just a mineral resource or a tourist destination. It's part of their heritage, their identity, their home landscape. Many support sustainable development that provides jobs and income, but not at the cost of destroying what makes this place special. Their perspective, rooted in generations of living with the salar, offers important wisdom about balance and respect. Traditional practices of salt harvesting continue alongside modern activities. In the dry season, you might see workers cutting blocks of salt using methods that haven't changed much in centuries. They work in the cooler hours of morning and evening, shaping blocks that weigh 10 or 20 kilograms each, stacking them on trucks for transport. It's hard, physical work, but there's a rhythm to it, a practiced efficiency that comes from deep familiarity with the material. The salt blocks are transported to Colchane or other small towns where they're processed. Some become table salt, iodized and packaged for household use. Some are sold as blocks for crafts or construction. The salt hotels are built entirely from these blocks, mortared together with a paste made from salt and water. When the wet season comes and the buildings get damp, the mortar slowly dissolves, and at season's end, new mortar must be applied, an annual ritual of maintenance. Inside a salt hotel, everything has a slight sparkle to it. The walls catch light, creating subtle glints and reflections. The floor, polished by thousands of footsteps, develops a shine. Even the furniture, carved from salt blocks, has this quality of understated luster. It's a unique aesthetic, minimalist, because salt is naturally white and simple, but also rich with texture and light. Sleeping in a salt hotel, you rest in a room that's essentially a crystal, surrounded by molecular structures billions of times repeated, each sodium and chloride ion held in place by electromagnetic forces. It's geology as architecture, earth as shelter, the boundary between inside and outside, made from the same substance that stretches for kilometers in all directions beyond the walls. As afternoon deepens toward evening, the light at Salar de Uyuni reaches its most beautiful quality. Photographers call this the _4_, though it lasts longer than an hour in this expansive landscape. The sun, now low in the western sky, casts a warm glow across the salt, turning it from white to gold, from cool to warm, from stark to gentle. Shadows lengthen until every small irregularity on the surface casts its own long shadow, creating a textured landscape where earlier there seemed to be only flat uniformity. The mountains to the west, where the sun is setting, become silhouettes, dark shapes against a brightening sky. This is the paradox of sunset. The sky actually seems to brighten just before the sun disappears, glowing with collected light, as if the day is making one last effort before surrendering to night. Colors appear that weren't visible at any other time. Peach and rose, lavender and coral, shades that seem to come from imagination rather than physics. If there's water on the Salar creating the mirror effect, this is when the magic becomes almost overwhelming. The golden light reflects perfectly, doubling itself, creating a world where everything glows. The horizon line, already subtle because of the flatness, becomes nearly invisible as the sky and its reflection blend into continuous gradient. You can stand in this doubled golden light and turn in a slow circle, seeing beauty in every direction without hierarchy, without diminishment. Clouds near the horizon catch the sun's rays and light up from underneath, their bases glowing orange or pink, while their tops remain white or gray. These illuminated clouds reflect in the water below, creating symmetrical pillars of color that seem to connect earth and sky. Sometimes, multiple layers of clouds exist at different altitudes, each catching the light differently, creating a complex architecture of color and shadow in the atmosphere. Birds returning to roost on the salt islands pass through this golden light, their wings briefly turning to copper or bronze as they catch the sun. If flamingos are present, their already pink feathers become incandescent in the sunset light, glowing as if lit from within. They wade through the shallow water, their reflections perfect beneath them, and in the quiet of evening, you can hear the soft sounds they make. Gentle calls to each other, the splash of their feet in water, the rustle of wings settling for the night. The salt crystals themselves seem to come alive in this light. Each tiny crystal face becomes a micro mirror, catching and reflecting the gold of sunset. The entire surface of the Salar sparkles and glitters as if strewn with tiny diamonds, or as if the stars have already begun to fall. Walking across the salt at this hour means walking through constant, gentle shimmer, surrounded by light that seems to emanate from the ground itself. Temperature is dropping now, though you might not notice it yet, wrapped as you are in the golden warmth of light, if not actual heat. But the air is getting cooler, and if you've been warm earlier in the day, you'll start reaching for a jacket or sweater. The transition from day to night at the Salar is not abrupt, but gradual. A gentle easing from one state to another, warmth fading slowly, light dimming by degrees rather than suddenly switching off. The exact moment of sunset, when the top edge of the sun touches the horizon, is worth paying attention to. The sun, distorted by atmospheric refraction, appears slightly flattened, like an oval rather than a circle. As it descends, it seems to speed up, sinking faster and faster until that final moment when it disappears and the direct sunlight is gone. But the glow remains, spreading across the western sky, not ready to leave just yet. In the minutes after the sun is set, the quality of light shifts again. The gold fades, replaced by deeper oranges and reds, then purples and blues. The sky becomes a gradient of color, still bright orange at the western horizon, fading through pink and purple to deep blue overhead, and already darkening to black in the east, where night is arriving. This gradient is perfectly mirrored in the water if the Salar is wet, creating a sphere of color around you. This is the time when Venus appears, if it's in the evening sky, the evening star, so bright it's visible even while the sky is still fairly light. Local names for Venus in indigenous languages often translate as shepherd star or guide star, the light that helps people find their way home as daylight fades. At the Salar, Venus shines with particular brilliance, its light reflecting in the mirror below, announcing the coming of night. The first bright stars begin to appear, Sirius, Canopus, the brightest members of their constellations, puncturing the darkening blue above. The planet Jupiter, if it's up, appears as a steady bright point, not twinkling like the stars do. Saturn might be there too, slightly dimmer, its golden color faintly visible even to the naked eye. These planets are fellow worlds, spheres of rock or gas orbiting the same sun, and seeing them from this high desert plateau makes that connection somehow more real. As twilight deepens, the Milky Way begins to appear. First, just a faint glow, then gradually becoming more distinct, a river of light flowing across the sky. The dark dust lanes within it become visible. The bright central bulge toward Sagittarius if you're looking at the right season. The Magellanic Clouds, two small irregular galaxies that orbit our own Milky Way, hang in the southern sky like detached pieces of the galactic river. The transition from a twilight to full night takes perhaps an hour, sometimes more. During this time, you can watch the sky transforming, stars emerging one by one, constellations assembling themselves point by point, the familiar patterns of the heavens taking shape. If you've brought a star chart or a phone app that shows constellations, this is a good time to use it, learning the patterns, finding the celestial equator, locating the south celestial pole around which all the southern stars appear to rotate. But perhaps even better than identifying constellations is simply lying back and looking up, letting your eyes adjust to the darkness, allowing the sheer number of stars to overwhelm you in the best possible way. Without trying to name or categorize, just receive the light, the ancient photons that have traveled for years or decades or centuries to reach your eyes at this exact moment, completing their journey in the nerves and neurons of your visual system. The salt beneath you has cooled now, releasing the day's heat back into the sky. If you're lying on it, you might need a blanket or a sleeping bag for insulation. The cold comes from below and above, the ground cooling rapidly, the thin atmosphere providing little insulation from space. But this cold is clean and dry, not penetrating like damp cold would be. You can stay comfortable with the right layers, warm enough to remain outside for hours if you wish, watching the sky rotate, watching meteors streak across the darkness, watching satellites trace their steady orbits. Some visitors bring telescopes to the Salar, and even a small telescope reveals wonders here. The moon, if it's up, shows its craters and Maria in sharp detail. Jupiter's cloud bands and 4 large moons become visible. Saturn's rings appear, tilted at their current angle, possibly the most beautiful thing you can see through a small telescope. The Orion Nebula, the Pleiades cluster, the Omega Centauri globular cluster, all these deep sky objects appear brighter and clearer than they would from sea level. But even without a telescope, the naked eye sky from Salar de Uyuni is spectacular enough. The stars don't just appear as points. Many of them show color: blue-white Rigel, orange Betelgeuse, red Antares, yellow Capella. These colors come from the stars' temperatures, their sizes, their stages of stellar evolution. Each star is a sun, many of them much larger than our own, some of them dying, some still being born, all of them engaged in the cosmic process of converting hydrogen into helium and releasing energy as light. The feeling of standing under this sky, on this white plain, at this altitude, is difficult to describe, but impossible to forget. It's a feeling of connection to something vast, of being part of the universe rather than separate from it, of participating in existence at the largest scales. The boundaries between self and cosmos become permeable, less fixed. You're made of the same atoms as the stars, organized temporarily into the pattern that is you, but ultimately part of the continuous substance of reality. The night deepens at Salar de Uyuni in layers, like a flower closing its petals one by one. The last hints of twilight fade from the western horizon, and true darkness arrives, though darkness at the Salar is never completely dark when the stars are out. The sky provides enough light to see the general landscape, to distinguish the flat expanse from the rising silhouettes of distant islands and mountains, to navigate without artificial light if you move carefully. The silence at night is profound, broken only occasionally by wind or the distant call of a bird. Sometimes the salt itself makes sounds, small cracking noises as it contracts in the cold, or creaking as the crust settles. These sounds are subtle, barely audible, but in the deep quiet, even small sounds carry meaning, drawing your attention to the ongoing processes that shape this place, even in darkness. If you're camping on one of the salt islands, you might hear the resident vizcachas moving about, their soft footfalls on rock, their quiet chirps as they communicate with each other. These animals are mostly nocturnal at this altitude, avoiding the intense daytime sun, emerging in darkness to feed on the hardy plants that grow among the rocks. They're shy creatures, and you're more likely to hear them than see them unless you use a flashlight, which might catch the reflection of their large eyes before they hop away into shadow. The temperature continues to drop through the night, reaching its lowest point just before dawn. In winter months, it can fall well below freezing, -10 or even -15 degrees Celsius. Ice forms on any standing water, creating a thin sheet that makes a satisfying sound when broken, a crystalline chiming that carries across the still air. Your breath becomes visible, small clouds of moisture that form and dissipate with each exhalation. Your respiration made temporarily visible in the cold, but cold as it is, the air is completely dry, and dry cold is easier to manage than damp cold. With adequate clothing, layers of wool or synthetic insulation, a warm hat, good gloves, you can remain comfortable even in these temperatures. The dryness means that snow is rare here, despite the cold. Precipitation usually comes as rain, even in winter, falling from clouds that contain liquid droplets, supercooled, but not yet frozen. The stars wheel slowly overhead as the night progresses, the entire celestial sphere appearing to rotate around the south celestial pole. This rotation is actually Earth's rotation, made visible. We're the ones turning, not the stars, but from our perspective on the surface, it's the sky that seems to move. The rate is precise, 360 degrees in approximately 24 hours, or 15 degrees per hour, 1 degree every 4 minutes. You can actually see this movement if you watch a star near the horizon for even 15 or 20 minutes. In the deep middle of night, 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning, there's a particular quality of stillness that's hard to find anywhere else. It's as if the entire world has paused, taking a breath, holding it. Time feels suspended, or perhaps more accurately, You feel suspended in time, existing in an eternal present moment that has no connection to past or future, only to the immediate now of cold air and starlight and salt. Some people meditate during these hours, sitting cross-legged on the salt or on a blanket, breathing slowly, allowing thoughts to settle like dust after wind has passed. The Salar seems made for meditation, its vastness and simplicity providing nothing for the mind to grasp onto, nothing to distract, only space and silence, and the invitation to be present. In meditation traditions, this kind of environment is considered ideal. Minimal sensory input, maximum quietude, the external world reflecting and supporting the interior stillness you're cultivating. Others simply sit and watch the sky, letting the spectacle unfold without analysis or interpretation. A meteor streaks across Sagittarius. A satellite glides steadily through Orion. The Milky Way slowly shifts position as Earth rotates, watching without trying to capture or explain, just receiving what arrives in each moment. This is its own form of meditation, a way of being with the world that requires nothing but attention. The cold eventually drives most people back to tents or salt hotel rooms, back to sleeping bags and warmth. But some stay out all night, determined to witness the full cycle from sunset to sunrise, to see the stars complete their arc across the sky. There's something satisfying about this completeness, about not missing any part of the transformation, about being present for the entire night's journey from dusk to dawn. For those who stay awake or wake early, the pre-dawn hours bring another subtle shift. The darkness begins to thin in the east, so gradually that you might not notice it at first. The stars in the eastern sky start to fade, not from clouds, but from the approaching light of the sun still below the horizon. This pre-dawn glow, called astronomical twilight, begins when the sun is 18 degrees below the horizon, when its light starts to scatter in the upper atmosphere, even though the sun itself won't be visible for another hour or more. As the eastern sky brightens from black to deep blue, the stars overhead seem to become even more brilliant by contrast, making one last appearance before yielding to daylight. The brightest stars and planets hang on longest, shining defiantly as the sky around them brightens. Venus, if it's there, stays visible almost until sunrise, the morning star living up to its name, the last light in the sky, except for the sun itself. Birds begin to stir on the salt islands, their morning songs tentative at first, then gradually building as more voices join in. If flamingos are roosting nearby, you might hear them beginning to move, their soft calls floating across the still water. The day is announcing itself through sound before it fully arrives as light, a gentle audio preview of the transformation to come. The coldest moment of night is usually right now, just before the sun rises. The land has radiated heat all night long, and the sun hasn't yet begun to replenish that warmth. If you're still outside, this is when you pull your jacket tighter, when you might stamp your feet to maintain circulation, when your breath makes the thickest clouds in the air. But you endure because you know the sun is coming, because the first ray of light is only minutes away. And then it appears, the first gleam of gold on the eastern horizon, the tip of the sun emerging from behind the mountains. The light spreads quickly once it starts, pushing back the shadows, warming the air, reflecting off the salt in brilliant sparkle. The night is over, a new day is beginning, and the eternal cycle continues its patient rotation, sunrise following sunrise in unbroken succession, each one unique and each one essentially the same, offering its light, offering its warmth, offering another day in this extraordinary place. The morning after a full night under the stars at Salar de Uyuni feels different than other mornings. There's a sense of having witnessed something fundamental, of having participated in the planet's rotation and the cosmos's eternal presence. You've stayed awake through the darkness. You've seen the stars from horizon to horizon. You've felt the cold of space and the warmth of returning sun. And you carry that experience in your body and memory. A gift the Salar has given you simply because you were present to receive it. As morning establishes itself at Salar de Uyuni, the sun climbs steadily higher, quickly warming the air and the salt surface. The temperature can rise 10 or 15 degrees in the first hour after sunrise, the cold of night retreating as surely as the darkness did. Frost that may have formed overnight begins to evaporate directly into vapor, sublimating without passing through a liquid state, creating small wisps of mist that hover briefly above the salt before disappearing into the warming air. The salt islands cast long shadows in the early morning light, shadows that shrink steadily as the sun ascends. On Incahuasi, the island of giant cacti, the spines of the cacti catch the light and glow like fiber optics, each spine acting as a tiny light guide, concentrating and transmitting the sun's rays. The cacti themselves are perfectly adapted to this environment of intense sun and minimal water, their thick, waxy coating preventing evaporation, their internal water storage allowing them to survive months without rain. These ancient cacti, some more than 1,000 years old, have witnessed countless sunrises, countless transformations of season and weather. They grow so slowly that a cactus that's 10 meters tall might be 800 or 900 years old, having begun its life during the medieval period, growing steadily through all the centuries since, through all the human history that's unfolded elsewhere, while here, on this remote island in a sea of salt, it simply grew 1 centimeter per year, patient beyond human comprehension. Around the base of the cacti, small flowering plants take advantage of whatever moisture and shade the larger plants provide. These small flowers are often brilliant in color, purple, yellow, bright pink, as if compensating for their small size with intensity of hue. They bloom briefly during and after the rainy season, setting seed quickly, then dying back to wait out the long dry months as dormant seeds in the soil, their annual cycle compressed into a few weeks of activity, surrounded by months of patient waiting. The rocky soil of the islands contains nutrients, washed there by rain, concentrated through cycles of growth and decay. Lichens coat many of the rocks, combinations of fungi and algae living in symbiosis, able to extract moisture from fog and dew, able to photosynthesize even in thin air and intense UV radiation. Lichens grow even more slowly than the cacti, perhaps a millimeter per year, but they're even more patient, able to suspend their growth entirely during unfavorable periods, entering a kind of suspended animation until conditions improve. Bird nests can be found in crevices among the rocks, small cups of woven grass, where birds raise their young during the brief summer months. The eggs are proportionally large because young birds need to develop quickly in this harsh environment, ready to fend for themselves before the short, favorable season ends. The parent birds work tirelessly, flying back and forth between nests and feeding areas, bringing insects and seeds to their hungry offspring. The insects themselves are specialized survivors, beetles with thick, waxy coatings to prevent desiccation, flies that can tolerate high salt concentrations, moths that emerge only on the warmest days. These small creatures form the base of the food web here, converting plant matter and decomposing material into animal protein that feeds the birds, which in turn feed larger predators like hawks or owls that occasionally hunt across the Salar. Walking around one of these islands in the morning, you're walking through a concentrated pocket of life in the midst of the vast, sterile salt flat. The contrast is striking, from complete biological silence on the salt to this busy miniature ecosystem on the island, all within a few steps. It demonstrates life's persistence, its ability to find niches and exploit them, to adapt to even the most challenging conditions and not just survive, but create beauty, complexity, and intricacy. From the top of an island like in Kawasi, you can see the full expanse of the Salar spreading in every direction. The view is humbling. You can see to the horizon in every direction, and everywhere you look is white salt and blue sky, with only the distant dark line of mountains breaking the pattern. The scale becomes comprehensible in a way it isn't when you're standing on the salt itself. You can see the curvature of the earth, the gentle arc of the horizon, and understand viscerally that you're standing on a sphere, a round world, spinning through space. This elevated perspective also shows you the patterns in the salt that aren't visible from ground level. From above, you can see the larger polygonal formations, the way the salt has organized itself into geometric networks. You can see variation in color, some areas more white, others slightly gray or cream, indicating differences in salt chemistry or grain size. As your time at Salar de Uyuni comes to a close, you find yourself changed in ways that are difficult to name. The vastness has entered you somehow. You carry it now in your breathing, in the way your eyes have learned to rest on distant horizons, in the quiet that settled into your thoughts like salt crystals forming in still water. The sun continues its ancient journey across the sky, warming the white expanse, painting shadows that will lengthen again as evening approaches. The salt will cool tonight and warm again tomorrow, breathing with the patient rhythm it's maintained for thousands of years. The stars will emerge as they always do. The Milky Way will stretch across the darkness, and the mirror, if rain has fallen, will reflect it all with perfect clarity. You understand now that this place doesn't need you to witness it. The Salar existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you've gone, performing its slow transformation, evaporating water molecule by molecule, growing crystals atom by atom, existing in its own time, which is geological time, which is the time of mountains and stars and patient minerals. But perhaps you needed this place, needed to stand in its immensity, needed to see yourself reflected in its mirror, needed to feel how small you are and how that smallness is actually a kind of freedom, a release from the burden of believing you're the center of everything. Here, the center is everywhere and nowhere. Here, you're just another temporary arrangement of atoms, visiting briefly, leaving footprints that the wind will erase. The flamingos will continue their ancient migrations, arriving when water appears, leaving when it evaporates. The cacti will add another microscopic ring to their patient growth. The vizcachas will emerge at dusk to nibble hardy grasses. The salt will expand in the day's heat and contract in the night's cold, creating and recreating its geometric patterns in endless repetition. And somewhere, someone else will arrive for the first time, will stand at the edge of this white wilderness, will feel their breath catch at the pure, vast beauty of it. They'll walk across the mirror. They'll watch the sunset paint the world gold. They'll lie beneath the stars and feel the same wonder you felt, the same quiet awe, the same sense of being held by something larger than themselves. The Salar de Uyuni asks nothing of you. It simply exists, offering itself, its silence, its space, its patient mineral peace. It invites you to rest in its vastness, to let your thoughts settle, to breathe in rhythm with the wind that's been blowing across these highlands since long before humans walked the earth. As you close your eyes now, wherever you are, you can return to this place. You can feel the salt beneath your feet, see the endless white stretching to every horizon. Watch the sky and its reflection becoming one. You can rest here, in this memory, in this peace, knowing that the Salar continues its quiet existence, that the stars still shine above it, that the mirror still reflects the heavens. Let your breathing slow, let your body sink deeper into rest. The vastness of the Salar is with you, in your lungs, in your heartbeat, in the space between your thoughts. You're safe here, held by the ancient salt, wrapped in the silence of high places, cradled by the turning earth. The white plain is still. The stars are watching. The night is gentle. And you can rest now, knowing that beauty like this exists in the world, that places of such pure peace are real, that you've touched them and they've touched you, and that connection remains. A quiet gift, yours to keep. Sleep well, surrounded by starlight and salt and the soft breathing of the world. Rest easy in this vast, gentle quiet. Everything is well.